Hello there. We're set to start Dominaria United in just a few days. So what I like to try and do before the set actually gets onto Arena or is on paper is try and look at all the cards and figure out what archetypes could potentially look like. And uh, in order to do that, oftentimes it's looking at the commons and the uncommons, understanding you might get fortunate and get a rare, might be a build around rare, might just be a strong rare or a mythic. But a lot of the decks are going to be driven on the commons and uncommons, so it's figuring out how those cards might play together, how synergistic the set and then particular archetypes could be, and just the power level. So yeah, what we're going to do today is look at 12 decks here, 10 classic two-color archetypes, and there's probably one, maybe two hidden archetypes that we can kind of investigate. So starting off with blue-white, Wizards has kind of described this as a combination of go wide with instants and sorceries, but also kind of a token generation. So something Blue White hasn't really done exactly. It's kind of a novel space for them. But yeah, we'll see how this might look. So I think one thing you're going to notice for this set is there are a good number of cards that cost 2 or 3 mana, and this is because many of them have a kicker that's between 1 and 4 mana. So there's a chance to get on board or interact early, but if you're able to stabilize, be at parity, or be a little ahead, you might be able to wait on casting some of your spells till they can have a bigger effect. Kick it once or twice, depending on what the spell is and how many kickers it has. So that's something to keep in mind. I think one of the tensions is going to be how good are spells in a particular color when you're either not able to kick it because you may not be willing to splash, you may not be in another color that has that kicker, or how do you balance, playing it maybe on curve or when you can without a kicker versus trying to wait and find potentially a better spot. It might not be a better spot to play a card with a kicker. So it's always a tension in these sets with kicker, dating all the way back to Invasion, Plane Shift, Apocalypse, IPA drafts. So with that in mind, we see kind of the breakdown for blue-white. It says only 12 creatures in this build, but we do have a good amount of token generation. So this will kind of play up a little bit. And then in terms of cards themselves, we've tried to limit it to only one of any particular uncommon and two of any common. So that's just a helpful thing to consider because it's tough to ask for, the draft allow you to get more than one of an uncommon that's actually good and you want in your deck, or oftentimes more than two of a common. With that being said, I think white is going to want to get on the board kind of earlier and find a way to kind of go wide. It has ways to take advantage of that. So Wrath, for example, allows you, when you're casting instants and sorceries, and there's a reasonable number of those in this deck shell, you can tap 2 untap creatures to draw a card. So this might help you kind of break parity by pulling ahead in card advantage. Maybe you can find some interaction, find some flyers, or find an answer to whatever an opponent's doing. And then it does give you a bit of a way to finish, because if you're going wide with tokens potentially, pump up your creatures, giving them vigilance, kind of like we saw on Steadfast Unicorn, though you can use this on either player's turn, can be really powerful, even if it does cost a lot of mana. And then also, when we look at Tura, even though it costs 5 mana, it's probably worth it. It's a 33 flyer, but if you can maybe, protect it with a card like Take Up the Shield, potentially, or though not in the shell, you could have like a, actually, no, we do have Shore Up in the shell, I believe. Shore Up got moved over. Or Shore Up, then you can have it as a way to generate tokens, either to go wide to pump, or potentially as chump blockers while you take to the airs with like your Soaring Drakes, your Lookout, your Tura. And then white does have a lot of enchantment-based removal. So we'll see like Citizen's Arrest, Prayer of Binding as ways to take a card like truly out of commission. Opponent can't blink it at that point. They have to destroy the enchantment to get their creature or their non-land permanent back in the case of Prayer of Binding. But a lot of these cards are trying to do 2-for-1 generate value. So like Tolarian Geyser, similar to kind of Repulse from way back in Invasion, though it's a sorcery, not an instant. Might gain you some life to catch up, bounce a creature, and draw a card. That's fantastic for 3 or 4 mana. Argivian Cavalier puts 2 creatures on the board, and it does have Enlist, so it may potentially be able to, attack the next turn for, 3 to 5 damage. Trade with the creature, leave the 1/1 behind. That can be used, for pumping later with something like a Heroic Charge. Or just build up a board, gum up the ground, and then wait for your Wrath pumping or Heroic Charge pumping. If you are looking for creatures to enlist, Samite Herbalist seems like a reasonable one. It's got 2 power, and then when you tap it, you do gain a life and scry 1. So the scry 1 should be pretty useful to try and get through maybe excess lands, find the action that you need. And then I think this deck will play in a fairly aggressive sort of method. Have some tempo with the geysers, the citizens arrest, even stall for time, which I think will be okay. I mean, you add draw a card to any card is probably going to be reasonable. But the chance here for this to be in color, to kick, to have 2 creatures, and stun them for another turn, could play maybe a little bit like Rooftop Nuisance from SNC. So you don't have to sack a creature here. That will cost, 5 mana rather than 3 mana if you don't want to keep them tapped down for another turn. All that being said, I think this could be a reasonable archetype, and it's not uncommon heavy. So you will see all of these shells are hoping to get, at least one of each of the commons within, or uncommon, legendary creatures within their color pair. Next up is White-Black. This is a color pair that I am pretty excited for. I think there's a lot of synergy between the 2 cards here, and they both cost a small amount, just like 2 mana, 3 mana. So Alas Ilkor can do a reasonable Lunarch Veteran impersonation from a few sets ago. Creature comes into play, you gain a life. Creature leaves play, dies in this case. Opponent loses a life. That's nice, and fine stats, 2/2 for 2. But the hope or the goal here is you're going to go wide with tokens and creatures. Sack some of them to beef up your whole team, so you're going kind of tall and wide. And then when those creatures are being added, you're gaining life. When they're being sacked or lost in combat, losing life. And then there's a reasonable number of 2-drops in white, and they do play well with black. It's like Banal Sleeper, for example. If you can play this, and sack a token and have an opponent lose a real creature, that's big game. 3/1 can trade with something, and then you're maybe getting rid of your token for a good creature of theirs. That's good, but you can always drop it on turn 2 if you really need to. If you don't have a token, you can always potentially sack a Splatter Goblin, which is a card I really like. I think it's going to play reasonably close to Shambling Ghast. I don't think it's going to be maybe quite as good because you don't have the potential of treasure synergies and Deadly Dispute and cards like that. But I think it has 2 powers, so it can trade, with 3 toughness creatures because the -1/-1, or it can get a 2-for-1 trade creature, knock off a 1/1 token or an X1, maybe flyer. You can even sack it to a Bone Splinter if you really need to. And then Resolute Reinforcements just gets a wider board, and Phyrexian Missionary. A 2/3 lifelink for 2 is already great, but being able to have this act like a Gravedigger, bring a creature back, is just big game when they're trying to answer your uncommon threats, your Elas or Aaron, or potentially you get some rares or mythics that you want to bring back as well. And then there's just a lot of value, like Phyrexian Rager from way back in Invasion. It's close enough to Priest of Age. Yeah, you lose life rather than gain life, but draw cards, got 1 higher toughness. I think this will play as well as it did in Invasion, if not better. And then there's some strong uncommons. There's some kind of cute, cheeky cards also, like Gibbering Barricade. If you're going wide with tokens, this is a helpful way to try and find some answers. It's not quite Skullport Merchant. You can't sack artifacts like treasures with this. but you do gain a life, which is kind of cute. And you can have your token block, sack it, search for an answer. And I think enough stuff will get in the graveyard that some of these other cards, like the 7/8 drops, that just get reduced by a certain condition. In this case, creatures in the graveyard. It's probably worthwhile in this deck. And 5/5 Death Touch, that's probably gonna have to be double blocked. And if you're fortunate enough to kill a creature in combat with Extinguish the Light, or play your Take 'em Shield to keep your Necromass alive. I mean, unless your opponent has a wide board, I mean that's probably just a scoop right there for them. So I think there's a ton of synergy, good interaction. A lot of it's cheap, 1 mana, 3 mana, 2 mana. So I think this can probably play fairly well. The concern could be with reach. You get opponent down to 5 to 8 life. How do you finish them? And hopefully it's pings from Elas. You might be able to go wide and just push through the last bit of damage that way. Okay, our next white archetype is probably one of the more aggressive decks. Probably white red and black red are probably the most aggressive, I would imagine, in the set. And white red, I mean, you're looking for your white kind of going wide, and your red just general aggression. So it's how white red usually plays. It tends to play pretty well together. I will say that the curve for this is pretty good to where we can probably get by with 16 lands. But some of these cards are just, very premium, like Lightning Strike coming back. Any target, 2 mana instant, 3 damage. It's going to play well. Take Up the Shield is probably needed in these decks because you want to keep, you want to be able to attack with Tori. Pump up your whole team. Maybe you have Trample if you have enough red creatures. And then keep Tori alive, like you Take Up the Shield. Or maybe drop a Heroic Charge. Also, there are ways to have other mid-range, not just aggro strategies. Like a Keldon Strike team, I think is going to impress in this archetype because you're getting 5 mana worth of power, but it's spread across 3 creatures. So yeah, 2 of them are 1/1s, but it's still tough to block all those creatures. So you're probably going to get some damage through, and it's almost like the Goblin from AFR, where you rolled your dice and you got 1, 2, or 3 1/1 goblins with it. Yeah, that creature was bigger, but this also has haste, which is nice. And if you're trying to set up an attack, you can always play this with a kicker and Heroic Charge next turn, or you can play it when you already have a Tori out and swing, and just pump the whole team. There's also, some other good cards here, going wide with your Resolute Reinforcements, through Cavalier again. I think Join Forces will probably be useful in this deck. It probably isn't going to be as good as Synchronized Strike was way back when there was Exert and Amonkhet, but I think can maybe make some of these have to block creatures survive combats. And it's 3 mana, so it's kind of a lot, but it still probably has a role. So yeah, I think this is going to be aggro, but it has enough closing power, whether it's trample or just overwhelming an opponent, or even going through the air with the Collision Skyguard after you've played a Counter Strike team with haste, for example, but you can't attack with it. So I think there's some cute plays you can do. Okay, last white deck, white-green. I am relatively excited about this. We're going to see the green decks are probably looking to splash. Branch out 2 colors and go into maybe 3 or 4. Of note, I think black probably splashes better with white-green than the other colors. In particular, we already looked at Aaron, but if we're going wide with white, and we can pump our entire team and put a counters on them, not just one time, +1/+1s, that can be huge. So a lot of the go wide, Captain's Calls, or Givian Cavaliers, are super useful, Resolute Reinforcements. off the curve 2, 3, 4 mana, putting multiple creatures onto the field. And then if we have a Czar, this really helps us if we've gone into like a splash for a third color. Maybe we've got our swamp, our forest, and our plains. Then all of our 1/1 tokens get bumped up, and whatever lives, if we can keep Czar alive, with like a take up the shield or some other type of combat trick, like a bite down, strength of the coalition, then we can do it again next turn, which I think is just going to be huge. And then the queen is saying, hey, put multiple creatures, put token creatures into play. I'm going to give you an extra +1 or extra 1/1 white soldier. So that just plays super well into the strategy here. And then we do have reasonable maneuver. Like, I think bite down will be fine, but I think we get Terror Sunder if we, splash the black, which I think is good. We still have Citizen's Arrest. We have, Prayer of Binding. And then we have multiple ways to take advantage of multiple creatures. I think we saw before that there's Heroic Charge, which can still be used in this deck, but I think Strength of the Coalition might be as good, if not better. Yeah, it's +1/+1 versus +2/+1, but these are counters you put on, so it can set up an alpha into another alpha. If you can't quite get the creature advantage to go wide enough to take them out in one attack, or they have multiple combat tricks, removal, what have you. I will say that the twos, though there are a lot here, I don't know if they're quite as strong as like in black-white. Like we get Phyrexian Missionary, but you really want to kick this if you can, and you might not always be able to kick it in these colors. You get a Neshoba Brawler, which I think if you can get your third color in there, being a 3/3 trample for 3, I think we'll play it really well, but 2/3 will be fine. And then your Juniper Order Root Weaver, I think will be fine, but you really don't want to play this on turn 2 unless you just need to get on board. And when you're playing it off curve, I don't think it's going to be great, because yeah, you can put a counter on something else. So maybe you can like slot this in later and double spell with it, but I'm still unconvinced. I think I'd rather have, if I can, Sunbathing Root Wallas or more uncommon 2-drops if possible. And then I think we do need some ways to consistently get the mana. So I feel like a Scout the Wilderness will probably play well in this, because if you can get the 2/1/1 white soldiers, I think that's good, even though it's 5 mana to do that. Maybe it's when you're setting up like a bigger turn, you're getting your black mana to set up like an Aaron, or getting another white or green to set up a card you need to play. So still to be determined, but we're going for lower curve and flexibility and optionality with a lot of the kickers. Okay, we're out of white. We're into blue. We'll start with blue-black. Well, I actually see there might be, 3 blue-black archetypes. So kind of spoiling the 2 hidden archetypes that we'll talk about later. But I think in this case, we're trying to say, okay, blue's going to care about spells, and black's going to care about, like killing creatures, clearing the way, maybe some. Look at some of these kickers, some like attacking the hand or getting card advantage in other ways. So all that to say, I think this is going to play in a more mid-range space. We're trying to be kind of aggro, kind of tempo, with some control elements, so more mid-range. But we have good 1-drops, so a card like Micromancer, if you can get it, is going to be able to search up, Arona's Vortex, which can act as a true removal spell, shore up to protect a creature, cut down as a removal spell, or like an Urborg Repossession to return a creature to your hand, whether it's one of our like strong legendary creatures, or like a Strider, a Terror, a Flyer, something like that. Tons of options. I think we can gum up the ground well enough with the Splatter Goblins and the Phyrexian Ragers to get card advantage there, get some 2-for-1s, draw a card with the Rager. Hopefully have the Splatter Goblin either trade up or trade with the creature plus like a token. And then I think we can search for the cards we need with Bohart and get back a strong instant. If we have it, whether it's a Small probe, Phyrexian espionage, like a removal spell, extinguish the light. We can get those back, which I think can be nice. Arona's Vortex. Or just know we have a good number of instants and sorceries, so we can, drain, lose life when you cast that with Rona in play. And then it is good to know that later in the game, when maybe we've traded creatures off, you start removal and some creatures that are tough to trade with, we can bring this back, discarding like 2 lands from hand, for example. And I think there's a role for Taurean Tear. This deck isn't designed to truly leverage the Tear, but I think there are ways to do that. And I think Tribute to Urborg plays a really good role in this deck, because oftentimes you'll be able to have it be a 2 mana kill early threat, or a 4 mana kill most cards in the format, because you're going to have a lot of sorceries and instants in this color pair. Okay. Another deck that I'm excited about that I think could probably be tier 1 is going to be blue-red spells. And I think that's because there are just some cards that can very much overperform in this set and in this shell. So first up, I think there's, let me show it better, Get-2 Amplifier. This can come down as a 1-2 for 5, which doesn't sound great, but you're returning a creature to play, and it can get +2/+0 when you play instant or sorcery. So it can clear a blocker out of the way while you can attack with some other creatures, and then it can make it challenging to block favorably. Yeah, the 2 toughness is not great, but I think if you have cards like Timely Interference to knock down the power, and Cantrip, and pump the Flyer's power up, that can be really useful. If you have a Shore Up, if you're not using it defensively, which is how it'll probably be used to stop a removal spell, you can use it to put a pump up the creature on the toughness. And then maybe you can even get Double Strike with Twinferno to just kill them out of nowhere, or make it an unfavorable block for the opponent. And then we also have Electrostatic Infantry, which is an uncommon, but it's just asking us to play these, cheaper cantrips, 1 mana if we need to, but guys are even at 3 mana is fine. I think Academy Wall can help us filter through lands or cards we don't necessarily want at that point. And again, Micromancer, finding a Shore Up to protect a creature, or Timely Interference, I think can play really well. And then Balmore is just asking to be abused, like giving Trample along with +1/+0. It makes it so you can't, chump block a Get-2 Amplifier, for example. You can't chump block a Jaw. Now they're going to want to kill this, but being able to play a Lightning Strike and copy it is probably just going to be a huge game. Or if you have, the dream is probably having a Balmore out within a Jaw, an Amplifier, and just copying your Twinferno. So you can give Double Strike to 2 creatures, pump them up, so they kill whatever's trying to block them, and just trampling over for whatever damage is needed. So I think there's some cool synergies in this color pair that should play pretty well. A lot of it's cheap, and most of it I don't think is going to be high set after. People tend not to draft cards like Shore Up as high as they probably should. And I think Timely Interference is probably going to play well. It's not going to be Jilt. Jilt was fantastic, but I think it'll be okay. It has draw a card. It has some cute little -1/-those ways to maybe blow out an attempted block on an Amplifier or an Najal, especially if you're copying it. And then obviously we'd like to get probably at least 1 Taurean Tear. Sort of higher up the curve, and we're probably going to try and be more mid-range tempo-y, but I think it'll still play well. Okay, and then blue-green. Again, this is where we're probably looking to splash at least a color. And I will say this is probably trying to play a bit of a longer game. We have Tatiova that's saying, I want you to get to 7 or more lands so I can give a land flying, turn into a 3/3 creature, and kill opponents that way. Notably, those are not good against sentries because they have 4/4 reach, so you're going to have some way to fight through an opponent's, Mana Golf Sentry if they have that. And then Neil, I don't think is great, but I think could have a role if you've got 3 or 4 different types of lands in play to help you filter, find what you want. But I do think there is a bit of ramp, like you've got a Scout in the Wilderness, and you're probably splashing white in this deck if you can, like a Weatherseed Treaty to be able to get you to play, your Mossbeard Ancient or find your plains for a Czar, for example. Get up to 7 mana, 7 lands for your Tatiova to start proccing. But also help some of these 2-drops play better, like you might be able to have your Neshoba Brawler be a 3/3 or 4/3. Have your Root Wallas, pump up +2/+2. At baseline, they're probably +3/3, +4/4. Maybe be able to play your Terra Sunder, either find a black mana or have a dual lane you can use. Or I think this is the place for Pixie Illusionist to help you be able to play some of these nice kickers on cards that might otherwise just be okay. You could have them really play up, like Rona's Vortex being able to kick it if you've changed the lane to a swamp. Terra Thunder like we talked about, Scout the Wilderness. Do some on-board tricks with Sunbathe and Root Walla. And then we have our new Organ Hoarder in a sense. 4 mana, 2/2, get a card from the top 3. I think will play well. It's not like a pull into the color. I don't think it's that strong. It's 2 colors, and it's only a 2/2. Cards that go to the graveyard, so you can't necessarily get some synergies from that. But I think it'll play okay. It's not a color pair that I'm super excited about, but I think there'll be enough synergies to be annoying if you can play these extra kickers that you might not otherwise get without the fixing, or these other cards get pumped up a little more than you would expect. Okay, on to the other, in my opinion, aggressive archetype. I think it's black-red. And the reason for that is there's tons of just aggressively slanted 2 and 3 drops, and your uncommon legends are asking you to just keep your pedal to the metal. Like Lagamos is saying, every turn I'm going to give you a 2/1 with Trample and Haste. It's going to sack at the end of the turn. You're going to be attacking with that unless you are sacking it to his Bone Splinters. Did I put it in here? Well, there is the wall. You can sack a creature to draw a card and gain a life, which could have a role here. But you're going to try and play 3 2s for 2 that are aggressive, clear the way with lightning strikes, play your splatter goblins. They can usually attack and are going to trade with something that's an NX3 or NX2 and an NX1. And then all this with getting some card advantage from Rager to keep putting the pressure on, bring cards back with Raise Prior Return potentially, getting card advantage to reload with Warhost Frenzy, giving the +2/+0 Anthem type of effect, but then drawing cards from creatures die. You can just alpha in, place it instant speed. It's not targeting a creature, so it should resolve, and then draw some cards back after you've done some big trade ups because of the +2/+0. And hopefully at that point you're also drawing cards with your Garna, for example, to refuel. So I think this will have an aggro strategy that will be able to refuel well enough with some of this interesting, kind of cute card draw that's on there. Okay, black-green is not a color pair that I'm very excited for. Black feels like it leans a little more aggro, though it does have some mid-range late-game cards like Urborg Repossession to bring back spells or creatures or permanents, which can be good. But a lot of his cards are aggro-leaning, like the Splatter Goblin. Even like the Rager can slow the game down a little bit. It can trade. It can draw you a card. But I just don't like the gold cards as well in this color. We might even have to splash for like a Tatiova if we are going to go a little later, which I think will probably end up happening. And creatures are going to die. So like a Withering Necromancer makes sense. You can bring back a creature with the Bone Rattler. So I think there's some play here, but it's probably going to require just some raw card power, because I think the synergies are sort of there, but the very graveyard focus, which don't always hit if you get cards to bring stuff back from the graveyard or cares about the graveyard, but you can't get stuff from the graveyard or vice versa. And then our last two color pair, green-red, I don't think this one comes together. Red wants to be aggressive. Green wants to be kind of dirtily mid-range controlling. Get your domain, get your colors, set up. So I just don't think this comes together, but maybe there's a way. If you can just load up on 2-drops and find good interaction like lightning strikes, to help keep your Radha alive when it attacks, or your Mulek Mons alive when it attacks, that's an option. You might be able to get cute with like a Gaia's Might to pump it, but it's probably only going to be +2/+2 because it's tough to splash, and what's probably going to have to be an aggressive color pair. So I'm not totally sold, but I will say there are some good 2-drops, so maybe it can happen. Like you have a 3/2 for 2 that might get haste if you play it on turn 3. You can play this to search for land to maybe help you get to your 4 or 5 drops. You might be able to drop a Molten Monstrosity, and like it's tough to do it on turn 4. I don't think you can without ramp, but you can do it on turn 5 and hold up a mana for like a Gaia's Might potentially. So there's some ways to do some cute stuff, but I'm just not convinced this is going to be one of the stronger archetypes. Okay, those are the big 10, but I think there are a couple hidden ones. So I think walls is going to be an option. I think the way to probably do this is you're going to need to be in black and white and then have a little blue splash. So like I think Coral Colony is another like alternative win condition, like just milling an opponent out. I think can be done. But I think what will probably most commonly happen is you have a blight pile or two, and you're just draining them every turn. And it's a reasonable block if you need to, but hopefully you're blocking with like your Gibbering Barricade. A 2/4 is a good blocker. You're tapping creatures down like an 0/3. You're putting creatures on the board with like Captain's Call, Splatter Goblin, Cult Conscript that you're gonna sack to a Gibbering Barricade to draw a card. And then hopefully if you have a Elas, you can, gain life when it comes into play and then drain them when it leaves play. And the other one you probably want is this Wingmantle Chaplain. Puts birds into play. You can gum up the ground with these walls, and then hopefully you can fly over for the last few points of damage. So we've got defensive speed with Splatter Goblins, Tribute to Urborg, which I think is worth it because you're hopefully going to have a blue splash. You can really knock this up some. And then we want to be able to bring some of our more important walls back. So if you don't have a reanimation spell or just return your hand spell, you can use a card like an Eerie Soul Tender. They can probably trade. You might be able to, bring it back with this ability. Hopefully you don't mill anything too crazy. And then we do have a Searcher for walls, which is nice. A 1/3 is not great for 4. Like, we're not super excited about that, but I think it'll still be fine. And then I didn't put it in here, and maybe I should have, but you could potentially get like a Walking Bulwark to let your defenders attack. I hesitate to put them in combat unless you really need to, or some of them. Like Coral Colony is not going to go to combat. That's a 1/4, at least not attacking. When you have a Walking Bulwark. But ideally, you're not going to block that because that's in our win condition. And ideally, you're not blocking with your Blight Pile because that's a win condition as well. But you have cards you can block with like Rager, Splatter, Goblins. You can remove creatures like Citizen's Arrest, Extinguish the Light, Prayer Binding. So I think there is some play here. I think there's enough interaction that should be able to get there. And then I'm hopeful that there's a Serpentine Curve 2.0 deck where you can have Clarion Terror with a good amount of instants and sorceries. You'll see this one probably has a few too many creatures, but I think Phyrexian Rager can work to trade off well and draw cards. I think your Academy Wall can work. To basically be looting to find your terrors. And then I think like a Rona can help drain life and come back when you're playing cards, or you can also loot with your Bohar and bring back some useful, sorcerer instant, whether it's Rona's Vortex for removal, you know, um, if you played Choke Miasma earlier to try and stymie the token's rather aggressive start, you can bring that back. I'm not sure if white wants to be splashed in this shell, but I think Clarion Geyser with white can be nice. And then there are some other white cards that maybe make sense, like Runic Shot is probably good in this deck as an example. And then maybe, where is it? Stall for Time. Yeah. Stall for Time is maybe good. Draws a card, can really stall for time, tap stuff down for 2 turns. So I think there's maybe some white cards you can get in here, but this is just about interacting with counters, kill spells, 2-for-1s with like Splatter Goblins and Ragers to keep the board fairly taken control of, and then have a Terror come down and attack through, and hopefully like shore up protection back up, or Geyser to remove some creatures to make attacks easier. So yeah, those are potentially the archetypes and what they might look like from a common and uncommon card standpoint. Rares can obviously shape things a lot, but there are some strong uncommons. I mean, we have 2 legendary creatures, for each traditional 10 color pair. So I'm excited for the set. I think there'll be a nice tension between drafting cards with kickers when you're maybe not in the color yet. You're thinking I might be able to splash that, I might not, versus saying I can go for some synergies rather than just straight 17 lands. We can game in hand win rate and sort by that and just draft that way. So I think it'll be a fun set. If you have any thoughts on this, you want to talk about how you might have archetype skeletons are built differently, yeah, I'm happy to chat. So just add a comment or message me, and we'll go from there. Thanks so much.